Sure.
I have switched over. In a second here, everybody will be in the world. Will be able to see us hanging out, and then tell us whether or not we got weird echoes going on, because we did last time. And then I think I figured out how to fix it. So chat room, let us know if there's weird echoes going on. In fact, usually it was other people, so somebody else say stuff.
Hello.
Banana.
I think it's going to be
Flump.
based on what.
No fishbowl or echoes so far.
I don't
it was
hear
just
anything.
in the stream.
Yes, that sometimes happens.
They're hearing it, but I think I fixed it now. So stream, are the echoes still there?
We've got 4 viewers.
Merrick is there, and he's he told us that there were echoes. So let us know if they're gone. I mean, I suppose I could turn the audio on and find out.
Merrick.
Streaming sorcery. Was a difficult area. Banana.
Banana nana.
Now you're making an echo.
Okay, so I think
Echo.
Teos, have you said anything since I think I fixed it? Merrick wants to make sure all of us are okay.
I'm saying things right now. Test 1, 2.
And then Ryan, say something.
All
right.
Hello there. Hope everyone's having a
And then
wonderful
Jeremiah,
evening.
Say hello.
Greetings.
Perfect.
I have a brand.
So it seems like we're fine. Everybody says it seems like we're okay. So yay! I've figured out how to stream. It's only taken me like 3 months. Yeah.
Good on you.
It is a devilish system.
It is a bit of a devilish system. And for a second there, Ryan's screen went crazy sized, but let me double check and make sure.
It didn't show up that way on the
Well.
stream, because I'm looking at the stream right now.
Yep, everything's looking good.
As long as it looks and sounds good on the outside, it doesn't matter what it looks like to us.
I figured out what the problem was, and I fixed the settings, so it shouldn't happen again. So, there we go. All right. Yay. All right, shall we get started? All right. Oh, I suppose I should actually hit record on my audios for a podcast. That is what we are here, right? A podcast?
Yes?
You don't seem so sure about that.
Once you stray into streaming live territory, I'm not certain we count anymore.
Our podcast listenership is significantly higher than our streaming viewership, so the stream is a fun little thing for people who enjoy to listen at this point. So, all right.
So when are we starting a streamed game on the Tome Show?
I don't know. Let's talk. I mean, not right now, but let's talk. All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Roll for initiative.
I have hit record, and I am going to go ahead and start. So, this episode of the Tome Show is brought to you by listeners like you. Thanks for using the Tome's Amazon and DM's Guild affiliate links, and for becoming patrons at patreon.com/thetomeshow. Welcome to the Tome, a D&D news, reviews, and interview show, and I'm your Tome host, Jeff Greiner. And I've become so powerful, I've taken over hosting duties all by myself in this episode, number 333, as we talk about high-level play in 5th edition D&D. Joining us for this episode is a wonderful band of epic heroes. First up is, I believe, the second-time guest, known to many as Alpha Stream, and designer, author, and to a large number of RPG books and articles and blogs and everywhere else. If you are paying much attention to who's doing stuff in D&D, you've probably heard of Teos Abadia. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be finally with you here as well.
Yeah, we got you on.
Thanks for having
I
me
managed
on.
to get you on an episode earlier, maybe last month. And then it turned out I was like traveling and couldn't actually be there for the episode. so you were all recorded without me. So it's nice to have you here and to meet you face to face, so to speak. I guess meet you. We've met before. I've actually hung out with you at some parties at Gen Con and stuff. But right on. Also joining us is the monstrous ecologist from the show on the Tome Show feed of the same name. Your friend and mine, Jeremiah McCoy. Welcome back, sir.
Greetings and salutations.
And then lastly, but not leastly, is a newcomer to the show from 2C Gaming, if I get the name right, coming to the rescue when I tweeted at the last minute that we had an opening for a recording in 20 minutes, and he has relevant experience. So welcome, Ryan Service.
Hello. Oh, it's great to be here. Subject.
Well, we love having people that
exciting.
have experience with this to talk about this particular subject. So, excellent.
Fantastic.
So, let's go ahead and jump on into it. In every edition of D&D, it seems like there comes a point where people start talking about high-level play and how to do it and why people aren't doing it and what have you. And in many ways, this discussion is universal. In other ways, we can get into specifics to this edition, 5th edition of D&D. This is sort of our chance to dive into that here, right? And to have our say sort of in that conversation of what's going on with high-level play for 5th edition D&D. Because apparently, if Twitter is any indicator, 5th edition is now talk about high-level play years old. That's sort of where we've reached. So, so I want to start off by going around the panel here and ask people, what is your experience with high-level play generally and high-level play in 5th edition specifically? Let's start with Jeremiah.
So, I am old. I've been around for a while. So my first experience high-level play was an adventure called Throne of Bloodstone from 1st edition. Wow. Came out in the 80s. It was part of a series of adventures. There was like the Bloodstone Wars, Bloodstone Pass. Throne of Bloodstone was the sort of final one in the series, and it sort of barely exists in Forgotten Realms. Like, it's in Forgotten Realms, but it doesn't involve anything else in the Forgotten Realms. It's just, yeah, this is up in the north somewhere.
It's in the Bloodstone Lands, I believe, is what that area is called.
Yeah, Vasa.
Yeah.
And in that adventure, it was evidence of the fact that they were struggling with what to do with high-level play even back then. Had a rules for playing up to 100th level.
That is high level.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, no kidding.
The pre-gens that they made to sort of come with the character with the adventure were 18th level, and it theoretically started at 13th level, and you could play all the way up to 100th. And it gave extra rules for them, which I only vaguely remember, because it's been a long time, guys, and I haven't had enough sleep since then.
Since way back then. Merrick is in the chat room giving us a history lesson on that specific series of adventures too. Apparently, it wasn't even originally in the Forgotten Realms, and they sort of retrofitted it to be that halfway through.
That was marketing purposes.
Yeah. The plot was you are, if I remember correctly, you're there to fight against a Lich King in Vasa, and to defeat him, you end up going to the Abyss to find Orcus and destroy his wand to break the Lich King's power.
So that was way back 1st edition. And have you done high level play then in every edition since?
No, didn't do much high level play in 2nd edition. Did do some in 3rd. And in particular, played around with the Gestalt system that came out in 3rd edition. And I have not done it since.
I happen to know for a fact you did some high-level play in 4th edition.
Well, yeah, okay.
Because I DM'd it.
High-level play. That's true. That's true. I did play in the reasonably high level in 4th edition. I left before you wrapped up the campaign, obviously. Yeah. But yeah, but I did. I think we got up to like 13th level, which for
okay. We'll talk later whether or not that counts as high level play.
Yeah, but I had to move out of North Carolina at that point. But yeah, and I when I talked about it earlier this past week, one of the problems is getting a group that stays together long enough to have a high level game naturally, like doesn't start at a high level, but naturally hits a high level is hard.
It's a long play.
Like it's a long time of playing, and it always has been, and that's why you haven't seen many options.
Okay. So you're the anomaly here, I think, because I've been specifically sort of looking for people that had some experience. I guess I didn't ask Teos ahead of time what his experience was, but I got the impression that he's got some experience. But you were the one who were the impetus behind this and started writing about it. So here you are, and you have some experience from previous editions with high level play. So Ryan, let's go down the circle here to you now. What's your experience with high level play in D&D?
Well, my very first experience was sitting on my dad's lap while he was playing Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2 and watching. He would let me press the space bar to pause the game for the rounds, that was my first experience, and I always thought being stronger was cooler, as most young people often think, right? Power is automatically more awesome in all circumstances. But I didn't have what I would call a sincere experience until 3rd edition. There are a lot of theory crafting and hypothetical silliness. But then I ran Age of Worms, and that adventure blew my freaking mind as to how amazing it was. Up until that point, I was fairly convinced that level was not a big factor when it came to storytelling, but I felt like Age of Worms showed me there were a few things that it really mattered what the strength of the people in the stories was affecting the type of stories you could tell. Not in huge ways, but in subtle ways that did feel impactful as you put them all together into one big experience. Then I took a huge break from 4th edition because I went to college, as one does. And then when I came back for 5th, and then we started our company a couple years ago to make RPG products for the system because the OGL is so generous, and I'm very privileged to be able to do that. One of the things I always wanted to do was one of our goals was to do things no one else had did. So we created an epic level 5e system called Epic Legacy, which goes from 21 to 30, sort of in the spirit of 4th edition. And we wanted to not repeat any of the mistakes of the past. So I took 5e and I took levels 10 to 20 and I just tore it apart because I wanted to figure out how not to screw this up. And then we made that system and people really liked it. And then we made a bestiary of CR 10 and up only of 100 monsters where we only wanted to do like really quality ones over quantity, really focus on delivering compelling experiences in that area. And between those two books, I must have run over 1,000 hours of high level characters, specifically in the 15+ range when we were doing play tests for the bestiaries. And then I ran a couple campaigns just to prove my theories, right? Because I wanted to make sure everything worked, and it was a ride. I learned a lot, and that was some of the most fun time I've ever spent playing D&D. Was just poking around and watching my players do amazing things I'd never even thought of, and then also thinking of amazing ways to like counter and interact with them. And that's been the last 2 years of my designer experience. It's been almost exclusively in that area.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Right on. So, Teos, tell us about your experience then with high level play. Mike Shea is in the chat and desperately wants to hear from you.
Thanks, Mike. Who's he? Just kidding. Right. Mike's wonderful. So I missed out on the spandex rules, also known as the Immortal set.
I had that too. I think I still do. Yeah.
Edition.
Yeah, I had those rules. I just never reached the point of being able to play with them.
The Immortal rules, and those of you on the stream can see, was all about being scantily clad as you reach epic levels of awesomeness.
You don't need all that armor when you're godlike.
Yeah, clothes optional.
So I read through that stuff, but I didn't play it. I did play through Throne of Bloodstone, so just like you, I had a super fun time with going through all these levels, and it was the end of my college campaign. So it was the 4th year of college, and we ended with that. And I think we got as far as level 32. We had to do one session where we all got together at my house after college to actually finish it and kill Orcus. Actually kill Tiamat, kill Orcus and Tiamat, and finish it all up. Because, of course, you have to bathe the wand of Orcus in Tiamat's blood to really destroy it and save Vasa, which is a big pain. So they just tack in, oh, by the way, why don't you kill Tiamat too? Because it's that kind of thing. And then I played 3rd edition. We've got the epic level handbook. We did some of that kind of stuff. And I reached the max levels and that good stuff through organized play, retired characters, and that was a lot of fun. And then 4th edition, I got to play the epic Living Forgotten Realms campaign, which was amazing, super story, incredible campaign. All kinds of ridiculousness in terms of what kind of 4E threats you fought against. And then now in 5th edition, I'm in the Tier 4 play for Adventurers League with my, I think, 3rd character that I started. So I've got a Ranger that's now, I think, a mod away from 19th. And I did also play in James Intercasso's Planet, Invasion from the Planet of Tarasques. Which is a level 20 adventure for 5e that's super gonzo and fun.
Right on. Yeah, so and now I feel bad because Teos came with props and what have you, and he's showing everybody the covers in the stream. So my shelf is all the way on the other side of the basement, so that's not going to happen over here. I think I have one book here. Yeah. I can show everybody the cover of the Eberron book because that's the last thing we reviewed. But so I started playing with 2nd edition. We got some games up into I definitely got into some epic level games in 2nd edition, and we had a thing going on with my game group where, especially by the time we got to high school, the game group was sort of like everybody had a folder full of characters, and whatever person wanted to run an adventure, we would just like, it's about this level, so everybody would just pull out whatever characters they had at that level, and then play them, right? And so there was no like major through campaign, but we actually, we played those characters generally speaking all the way up from level 1, and many of them ended up being epic levels or high levels, 15 plus up to 20-ish over time. And then 3rd edition, I feel certain I played some high level games in 3rd edition. I don't know that I could name them because that was a long time ago, and like Jeremiah, I'm also old. I'm not Jeremiah old, but I'm getting there. I'll catch you someday.
I hate you.
And then, but 4th edition, I played at least one 1 to 30 campaign, and maybe I might have had 2 campaigns that got 1 to 30, and the second one might have gotten close into the epic tier of 4th edition, because of course in 4th edition levels went from 1 to 30 instead of 1 to 20 like all the other editions. Now in 5th edition, I've played 1 campaign all the way 1 through 20. I had a playtest campaign. I think in that one we made it up to 20-ish in the playtest campaign during when it was D&D Next, right? And I've got another one that's going to go into high levels right now, but right now they're just knocking on the doors of 5th level. So, but I have plans. So, so that was a lengthy introduction, but I think worthwhile for all of us. I want to ask the question first. We're talking about high level play, but obviously, in different games and in different editions, what we call high level play might be different, right? Obviously, in 4th edition, high-level play was explicitly detailed as level 21 through 30, right? Other games might have different leveling systems, what have you. So what do we call... How do we define high-level play? What do we think?
So, like you said, it's edition specific. One of the things that I use as a sort of a measure is less about what level range. I mean, it is level range. The most powerful character class traditionally at high levels was wizards.
Especially in older editions, yeah.
I mean, yeah, like magic user, whatever the name of it at the time was. The older editions they were insanely powerful. Once you could start casting 8th level spells, which in these days would be 15th level. And I think that would be a definition that at least most people would accept as high level play in 5th edition. Different people will have different experiences. Obviously, if you're using rules for 21 to 30, obviously you're setting the bar a little bit differently. But for standard 5th edition play, that's like the top tier, I think. It's fourth tier is what? 16 through 20, something like that?
17.
17 through 20? Okay. So, yeah, I think that once you're able to cast 8th level spells, I think you're in the high level play range, because you can do things that are nuts with a spell.
Yeah, maybe that's a good generic term, is just that point where you can cast spells that are sort of bending the rules, right?
Yeah. I mean, when you can do things like cause earthquakes and, that monster, yeah, he's mine. I control him. Or, I'm just going to create a fortress here because I can.
So my fighter will never be high level. Because he'll never cast 8th level spells.
But you have to look at your friends and see what they're doing.
Yeah.
Spellcasting friends.
That fighters at high levels have a name. It's Meat Shield. You're the speed bump between the caster and whatever's coming to stop the caster. Accept this and move on.
Right.
That's a joke. Obviously, different styles and everything, but yeah, once you get up to the levels where you can like summon fortresses and create clouds of gas that can kill like small armies, and that's when you're okay. Yeah, you're in high levels, and traditionally the fighter path at that point was things like you have an army, basically you have a castle and minions who work for you and so on. So that was their expression of high power.
Any other sort of hallmarks of high-level play or tweaks that we want to make to Jeremiah's definition? Or does that sound good to us?
Yeah, I would, in the interest of sort of being fair to the martial characters, I would define it as agency in your ability so far as that you, at higher levels, what you can and cannot do is completely different than what you can and cannot do at lower levels, right? Like, I would say your opportunity cost for doing most things has gone way down. So an average like 20th level fighter, for example, in 5e, if you're a champion, is one of the highest damage per round dealing classes in the game, competing with like Paladin and Hexblade Warlock, right? And we're talking like hundreds of damage on like lucky rolls in some cases, right? Or you can do all these amazing things, whereas if you tried these things at low levels, at the very minimum, the outcome would be far more in question, or the consequences for doing so would be extreme. You can't walk up to the king and snap his neck at level 5 because obviously you could, but the cost of doing so would be so extreme that you'd never want to.
At high level play,
whereas like at high levels,
do it and take on the army. Yeah.
Yeah. So I often see it as a question of agency and freedom, where oftentimes at lower levels, I think you know where the boundaries are, in higher levels, less so.
I could tie off of that a bit. Along the story axis, you begin to, especially starting with third edition and D&D and moving on, you begin to really define who you are. So, you're a fighter, but then you choose a path of some sort, whether it's Paragon or an Epic Destiny, whatever it might be. You choose some mechanism by which you start to really build up what you are, and you see the fruits of that. You really make choices that define what kind of person you are, and that becomes, a real presence at the table in the way that you do things. And you're different than another level, whatever it is, high level of your same class.
Okay.
But it's worth noting that other RPGs don't even use levels, right? So you have something like Shadowrun where you spend points to boost your shooting or your decking or your ability scores, right? Or Legend of the Five Rings. And so it can be really hard in other editions where you don't have levels, because you could choose to go along one way that you're increasing your character versus another, and it can be very difficult to decide what really is high-level play. And a lot of the games don't even bother, right? They don't have a per se high-level game or rules for it.
My favorite non-D&D game of the last several years has been Torg Eternity, and they don't have levels at all, but they still kind of have tiers, because the idea is that you're working within an organization, and there are clearance levels. And so after a certain point in the game, you reach another clearance level, and that opens up new ability options for player characters, and eventually you can make it to super powerful, world-shattering clearance levels where you know everything and can kind of do whatever you want. Jeremiah?
I was going to say there's two discussions that go on here. I suppose I started with the mechanical, right? What mechanical thing defines high-level play? And the character options being another example, like they were saying, at what point does your character begin to define itself beyond just being a standard fighter, a standard wizard, or what have you, where their power is a definition by itself. But the story level of high level play is super hard to define. And I think part of that is our source fiction. So if you ask any Joe Schmo walking around in Western society what a fantasy story would be, they're probably going to think of Lord of the Rings.
That's fair.
And a lot of D&D's tropes come from there.
And that moment when Frodo used his level 30 ability, that was amazing.
That's the problem. Like 90% of everything that happens in Lord of the Rings would not rise above 6th level abilities for D&D terms.
Yeah, that's where the epic 6th concept comes from.
Right. But no one can really argue that isn't an epic story. Like, that's an epic story. Like, they're saving the world.
But it's not a high-level story.
Right.
And one could argue it's not a high-level world.
Right. No, exactly right.
It's for that world, it is high level. And, if you want to play that world, go play the Lord of the Rings D&D port that
they recently lost the license for. But that's another story.
Right, sadly. But you can still find the books, and it's fun. But more to the point, when you're looking at high-level play on a story level, you've got to look for other sources of inspiration. You can look at some of the D&D books.
The novels.
Because there are some novels that demonstrate it. Certainly some of the later Drizzt novels, definitely.
And the Elminster stories are there.
I mean, yeah. And a lot of times it feels like they wrote a story to match what the character could do, like mechanically, and then that's how they got their high level story, rather than like the Avatar trilogy.
Yes.
Should be a high level story, right? But I think the adventures were not actually all that high level.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's world shaking. Your ability to affect beyond just the local is an element of high level
Merrick
play.
in the stream is pointing out or asking about Avengers Endgame as source material for epic level or high level play, right? Because you're taking on the big threat and you're time traveling and changing the universe. And I think that's, in my mind, and this is where I wanted to go into what kind of stories we tell in high level play anyway next. So that works out well. Thank you. In my mind, that's a big changeover, right? Before high level play, like, you work to thwart the plans of the demon lords. In high level play, you go take on the demon lord, right? And that's the same reason why I think you're right that Lord of the Rings is not high level play. Because if it was, it wouldn't be defeat the plans of Sauron. It would be, well, there's going to be a team of adventurers and they're going to go take on Sauron, right? And they're putting together the things they need to beat him. And that's sort of the switchover in my mind when you're telling high-level play stories, or at least one of the switchovers.
Yeah, and I think that the Tolkien lore, aficionados will point to the Silmarillion and the and some of the other sort of extended fiction for it. Well, if you want an example of that, go look at the stories in the Silmarillion. But yeah, you got to establish what sort of fiction you're trying to emulate.
I think both things are true. I'd argue that you have your stories that are epic that really anybody can play, right? So like 5th edition has done that whole hog, right? From taking on Tiamat at relatively low levels, right? I mean, at the end it gets pretty high, but it's still not, it's not a high level campaign. Start at level 1.
I don't think any of the campaigns go past 15, do they?
No, well,
Dungeon on the Edge is the only one.
Yeah. And they don't, they don't say, well, let's say they start at first, right? So you take on the Death Curse with Tomb of Annihilation, and it's not a high-level game, and you do face off against, a powerful ancient foe. So we've seen plenty of that, right? That we're still doing sort of Lord of the Rings, where you can be low level and you can have an amazing, awesome story. You don't have to be Mike Shea fighting rats in the cellar.
Called out.
Called out. No, I love you, Mike. But you also can say, I think that we are called to do those epic Avengers Endgame type things where we do feel like superheroes. The threat is huge. It's planar. It's ancient eldritch horrors come from before. It's Tharizdun. It's Orcus, right? It's those big things that I think are the hallmarks of that kind of game.
Yeah, I think as is often the case these days, Critical Role is the elephant in the room. They provided a really good example of what high-level play when they wrapped up the first campaign. Like, they're taking on a nascent god who is marching towards a city on the inside an autonomous city himself.
Not to get too spoilery, but yes. Yeah.
Well, and also, I mean, one credit to that campaign is that at the end they are doing the culmination of major arcs involving the characters. The characters are doing amazing choices at the last seconds, right? Whether to how to use a wish spell versus counter spell. Do you save your friend or stop the evil person from fleeing? I mean, really good epic play. Right there.
The consequences are there. And that's important.
And that starts to get into another topic I wanted to discuss is, like, one of the things that is done there is that story is engaging the players at high level in those character moments, right? That's one of the things you can do to make high level play work, is that the narrative kind of is the narrative regardless of level, right? The scope of the narrative might be different. And one of the things I notice when you look at that campaign, and I can speak to the end of it fairly recently because I just finished it about a month ago, listening to the audio, is that there is a lot of narrative and there is a lot of character development, but it's mostly between each other. Like, there's very little sort of major character development outside of that group, right? So you provide those opportunities to role play. You provide those opportunities for them to develop in that way. But this gets into some player advice as well. Like, the players should look for those opportunities to push the narrative and enjoy the story as much as, you know, going out and killing things with you know, big giant god things, right?
Well, one of the problems I encounter a lot is that 5e is very top-heavy, and what often ends up happening, because when you create a new 5th edition character, you create a lot of interesting things besides just rolling up the stats and picking the you know, the class and whatnot. You're picking a background, ideals, bonds, and flaws, and these never change no matter what level you are. And I find this a very peculiar circumstance, and one that I've started to revise in my games, where every 5 levels my players revise their ideals, bonds, and flaws. Because in my opinion, the most important parts of your character's personality and their lives are what happens over the course of the adventure, not what preceded. Usually, in some circumstances, you know, I think it's appropriate to keep elements from the past, but I really like this reassessment of what it means to be a person doing the things that you are doing.
Yeah, that just became a house rule in my game, so thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so what ends up happening is when I give my players a moment to reflect every 5 levels, instead of just taking count of the mechanical advantages that they have gained, which is something you're always doing because the game forces you to, they take account of the story moments they have used and accrued and added to their characters. And they're rewriting their stories, or in some cases, my players spend much more time writing down how their character felt about the adventures when I give them the opportunity to, and use that to define new aspects of their personality, being like, you know, my character died at 13th level, and I didn't get brought back to life for a week. I'm like, yeah, what happened while you were dead? Because we're playing in a planescape cosmology, so you went somewhere. What was that like? And then the player can choose to make that experience something of their own. And this starts to, I think, encourage epic storytelling, where normally you're given just the mechanics to encourage epic storytelling, many of which are wonderful. There's lots of storytelling mechanics in 5e, but I like to take that opportunity to spend a little more time on for the player assessing their character's personality and how they've grown and changed, to sort of mirror Merrick's statement on Avengers Endgame. I think part of what made that story so epic was it was a story culmination of how those people had changed over the course of several movies. And that was sort of actually the inspiration for me to prescribe this for my people using my epic system. And even just encountering high-level stuff in general, I constantly encourage reflection about what those adventures have changed about those characters. And I find that dramatically improves people's commitment to playing those characters, with burnout being such a huge factor.
Yeah.
I think one of the elements of being that end of the power scale is you are no longer afraid of what would be considered, in most fantasy settings, minor problems. Like, okay, there are dozens of orcs. We can deal with this and, like, sit down and have a snack afterwards. This is not a problem. We don't even have to, like, take a short rest for this. What are you talking about?
You've suddenly become Spider-Man and the bank robbers, right? The bank robbers are no longer a threat.
Right. Yeah, right. So once the threat becomes higher, what you're willing to pay to defeat that threat also becomes a conversation that the players should be having with themselves and with their DMs to a certain extent. And if it's not that, if it's just, well, you're just outpowering it, yeah, it might be high level, but it doesn't feel good. Like, it doesn't feel like a good use of where you're at. Because after a certain level, and certain power, I've run into this in LARPs too. Like, okay, I'm just gonna go do this thing because I can just outpower it. And you when you were running a high level game, you need to think about what is this going to cost these super powerful beings. You have to come up with something that will cost them, and it's not just throwing so much heavy stuff at them that it will eventually kill them. It shouldn't be who's got the biggest stick. It should be more nuanced than that.
So this
That makes sense.
transitions us well, and somebody in the stream chat is bringing this up also. Then it also feels like, as a DM, it gets harder and harder to appropriately challenge the characters in high level play. So, what do we think about that? It looks like Ryan has an opinion.
I mean, this is like my jam. So we wrote the total party kill bestiary volume 1, and that's CR 10 and up monsters. And when we did it, we took all the expertise we had running high level games, and we said, let's make monsters. But there's a section at that start of the book where I say, what does it mean to challenge high level players? And often I say, well, these monsters are very powerful. What makes them compelling isn't that they can threaten a TPK, though that is a very fun element of it. What makes them interesting is that they can threaten what the players care about. Their items, the people, their worlds, their homes. And this is how you should use them. Because players can come back to life with a 3rd level spell slot. Right? It's not about killing them. It's about sending a message. And the message should be, these things are scary. So the question is how do you scare someone with something so powerful? So an example we use, we have one of our creatures in there. We call it a gracious humility based on a holy virtue. And when it zeroes you out, it doesn't kill you. It shrinks you down to a tiny little person, and it's a floating island surrounded by halos. It's small, big, but a tiny, model island. And it puts you on there. So if it TPKs the party, they all end up on this island, and you can't escape unless you learn a lesson of true humility. Then the Celestial lets you leave. Alternatively, you can try and trick it, but it has expertise and insight. So you can be like, please, sir, we've learned our lesson. Let us out. And it's like, no, you can't leave, right? So it's a CR like 17, 18, 19, but the point is you can use it to just whoop some ass on some players, but they don't die. They don't get TPK'd, but they do have a moment where you're teaching high-level players humility. They have to learn an authentic, humble lesson before they can pass that encounter. And every time I've used that, my players have been like, that made me so upset, but in all the right ways, right? And that's a compelling experience, a compelling challenge for them. A high-level character had to learn humility. And that's sort of one of my best examples, but sort of echoing, like, what does it mean to challenge them? It's just like, go after what they care about. Like, they're proud. They love their loot. Take one of their favorite shiny toys. Just watch them lose their minds. It's amazing, right?
Consequence damage.
Yes, focus on consequences and realize that death is no longer a consequence. It doesn't mean the same. Well, and
that's part of the trick, right? Sure. Is that when I ran I mashed up the Rada 7 parts, Out of the Abyss, and Princes of the Apocalypse into one campaign, right? And it concludes with the big Demon Lord Battle Royale sort of thing that Out of the Abyss concludes with. And you want to make a fight with Demon Lords a challenge. A legitimate challenge at any level. But that's hard because you don't know what the players are going to do because there's no way you can know what they can do. Like, any individual character is so complex and has so many options available to them. You can't predict any one character, and then you put them together and the combinations they can put together. It's very hard to provide just a straight up like mechanical challenge like you could at a 5th level party fighting the big warlord or whatever, right? And so it's a different sort of challenge. And so I really like that idea of lean into the consequences. Like, the bad guys need to be able to mechanically like survive, right? But they have to they have to focus on different consequences. I like that idea.
I think historically, the editions have done a very poor job upon release of meeting what's needed to provide a numerical, mathematical challenge to characters at the point in time when they reach those levels where they're playing high level, right? Which is usually after several books have been released, after they've been playing their character for some time, after they've become experts, and you're running these monsters that were designed way back when, fourth edition sort of nation out there of how they never play tested high level play.
Right.
And in fact, they even thought about releasing it separately and then kind of decided, no, because high level never sells well, so let's just roll it all in one. But it just really didn't work, right? And I think it's important to as a DM, when you're running high level, to think through and talk with your players about what that desire for challenge really is, because we tend to think of it as knife's edge, as Avengers Endgame. Everybody could die. Anything could happen. We don't know who's not going to come back. But most players kind of really like their character around then and aren't necessarily looking. They might want an epic feel, but they could easily actually want to have overwhelming victory against a god, right? So we have to have a conversation and think through what is it that players really want.
Yeah, and I do want to push back a little bit on the idea that 5e is too complicated at higher levels, or this idea that it gets out of hand, because it's never, and this has like been my mantra, it's never been easier in D&D, in my opinion, to run a high level game, right? Like going from Age of Worms in 3.5 to a 5e hack that I'm running now, it's like night and day. It's amazing how much easier it is, which isn't to say easy,
right?
But certainly I think it's a thing that the average DM can readily aspire to do much more readily. And I think that there's a perception of a wall that isn't as solid as people think. They see it as this incredibly steep mountain, but I think it's much more of a once you figure out like what force cage is and how paladins fish for crits and all that stuff, you start to realize that, at least after my hundreds of hours of games, that the system is still elegant and it holds up so well. Like, yeah, players have wish, but there's some big restrictions on that 1/8 level slot a day, right? They're not going to be wasting that. They're going to hold that in reserve, that world-changing spell for a key pivotal moment, and you can bank on that, right? Whereas like in 3.5, it's like, this is my 4th 8 level slot for the day. I have 4 more. What level are you? 15, right? It's like, geez Louise. But it's so satisfying to run a high-level 5e encounter that goes great. It's just like, I want that experience for everybody because it's so satisfying.
I think I largely agree with you, but I also agree with Merrick in the chat here that while 5e is way easier than 3rd edition and before, 4th edition was arguably easier just because the math was so obvious and it was really transparent, which was also one of its major flaws because the game became overly much about the math instead of about the role playing, right?
Oh yeah, and 4E's my weak point as a designer, so I 100% believe Merrick when he says something like
4th edition is just a scale, so it's continually scale upwards, so it's the same game and you're just telling a story with it, right?
Yeah,
right.
There are some differences, but it's basically that.
No, I think that's
well,
right.
also, I mean, mechanically, the structure limiting you to use of certain number of daily encounter and at-will powers meant that the amount that you could throw at a particular problem was scaled up to the level that you were at, but it wasn't actually all that more than you could at lower levels. It's just more damage, more abilities, but the actual amount that you were throwing was about the same.
5e still has a lot of issues, I think, for new DMs with counterspell. There are just so many things that as you start playing, these various spells begin, and even in middle tier, begin to shape the experience in problematic ways, right? We see it in organized play for sure. We hear about it on forums. There are plenty of DMs that are like, I don't know how to threaten my players. they just polymorphed into, pixie, or they just summoned a bunch of pixies who all polymorphed into T-Rexes, and they want to do this every encounter. Right? There's just plenty of that, and it's because there is that level of mastery, particularly around spells, that is troubling for DMs.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of it requires just, unfortunately, research, right? The DM has to read their way through the problem or think through counterspell. What's the range on that? How do I counterspell a counterspell?
Do you think that is exacerbated in organized play versus home play?
I mean, I read plenty of forums when I dare do so that seem to have, if not greater, problems with it in home play situations. It depends. I played at a level 10 table with a group. This was organized play, but it was a group that play at home. We walk into the first encounter, and there's like a cool aboleth. I'm like, sweet, never fought one. I'm excited to do this. And so the guy banishes the aboleth. And then everything else was a joke. And my designer brain, I'm like, oh my God, we've just neutered this encounter. There's nothing to threaten us. And in fact, there was nothing. So we killed it in a few minutes. And then everybody readied and destroyed the aboleth when it reappeared. It never got to act. We go to the next room. He banishes whatever the big thing was in that room. And we get to the third encounter. And before we open the door, I say, so what if we don't banish whatever's inside? Because I know you're a diviner, you're setting the DCs, you got all this stuff. What if we don't? What if we just fight it and see if we need to do anything? And you don't hypnotic pattern, and you don't counterspell the thing's spells. Like, let's just see what happens. And they were like, haha, no. They're like, we run for each other, and we take turns DMing, and whoever DMing just has to deal with the fact that we're going to throw this at them. And we just take turns. I'm like, well, what if you didn't do that? And they just laughed. They're like, no, we can't imagine a world where we don't just torture each other.
Well, I mean, to be fair, asking players not to play their characters to the power level that they built up to is sort of asking them to ignore a thing that was a path for them.
Yeah.
Like, this is a reward. You got this power because you played this long.
Yeah.
Once they get up to that level, then asking them, hey, don't do that. Okay. Sure. You've disabled my reward.
And I think there's a good argument on both sides of that conversation, right? On one hand, absolutely. Like, if my players they're clever, they figured out what the bad guy is, they figured out a strategy that works, like, reward that. If they're doing it every encounter, now you're yucking my yum, sure. So.
Yeah. Well, my response, and has been traditionally when dealing with players doing the same trick over and over again is, all right, I know your trick. I know how to counter that trick. So, all right.
But that depends on the edition, right? So like in 4th edition, I ran an interactive, and there was a guy playing a pre-errata blood mage. And he had a combination of solid fog and his blood mage power and other stuff in 4th edition that basically meant the entire battlefield was covered in this stuff, where if a monster moved, they took insane damage. And if they stayed still, they took insane damage. And by insane, I mean they're basically dead in 2 rounds. And he could do this every round, or every encounter.
Sure.
And so after the first encounter of what's supposed to be a thrilling, challenging interactive, I said, hey, I know you've got your character. You're clearly loving it. What do you think about don't quite use all of that? And he's like, well, and he said, it's like, well, I get to, it's my stuff. I'm like, I know, but I think I can't threaten anybody at this table if this is happening. And I know you can do this. And he's like, well, and so finally we brokered a deal where he used just one of his abilities and not the 3 of them that caused the chaos. But I mean, he was kind of complaining, right? But I mean, it was really unplayable if he did what he did.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think it's important to keep in mind too is the challenge system is not being used properly in the overwhelming majority of these cases, because the players have magic items, usually more than they should. The players are multi-classing, which is a variant. The players have feats, which is a variant. All of these things are making characters, on average, much more powerful, especially in organized play. Because I think at the start of organized play, they were like, no multi-classing, and people like had a riot. I think I remember hearing something about that. And that should affect how the encounters are built, but it hasn't for the overwhelming majority of designs that I have seen, where the monsters need to be, the system needs to be adjusted for the fact that the average characters are much stronger than they should be, like resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magic weapons. That's almost never a thing, because martial characters always have the magic weapon they want, but it's very clearly factored into design math to effectively double a creature's hit points. It's intended to be there. So when that isn't a challenge factor, your creature's hit points is halved. And when we did our bestiary, we just said, we're going to look at each monster and we're just going to like treat it like it was 4 higher, CR wise, when we're comparing it to relative examples. And it's gone great because the players are getting challenged, and also killing them doesn't mean anything. So a deadly encounter at level 15 kills 2 characters. Okay, right. But it's still called a deadly encounter. You're only supposed to do 1, but the reality is they could do 3. Right. And if we think about the game in that way, suddenly it becomes so much more interesting and challenging at high levels, and still fair. I've had players in my bestiary playtests fight a CR 18, a CR 20, and a 24, and finish with the 27 with 18th level characters with 2 magic items each. It was a narrow thing, but they did it. Right, and this was with my like harder stuff, my bestiary designed to be hard, designer expertise stuff. Did they think they could do it? No, they're like, oh, there's no way we can't do this, and then they scraped a win. And I was just like, that's awesome! Look at them go! Like, these guys are killing it. So I was just convinced. I'm like, man, we could just make this so much harder, and they'll still scrape a win. Like, just go nuts on them, and don't tell them what the CR is. Right? Don't tell them. They don't care if they just killed a 20 or not, as long as it's feels like it belongs there.
Oh,
and they're
also,
level 12.
I think that going back to the consequences, like, sure, you can overpower this, small army of ogres. Absolutely. Unfortunately, while you're doing that, they're killing the people in the town you're in. You need to find other ways of dealing with this. Or, you can go fight the Lich, but he's got his minions attacking the things you care about.
Yeah.
And, he's unless you've got his phylactery, he's probably going to get away. Yeah. So, dealing with the consequences is a good way to sort of trump the outpowering issue.
Yeah.
That said, definitely increase the HP on pretty much any high level monster that's been printed, by at least a quarter. Because almost all of them would not last 3 rounds. And when most I get to on-level things, fighting them will just chew them up like a chainsaw.
I don't know that I've ever gone into like a high-level boss fight sort of situation and not modified and tweaked and redesigned the creatures that I use just to make sure that it's not a cakewalk, right?
Pushover,
and to keep them challenged, because at that point, like, we're getting high level and we're running up to the boss. At this point, I've seen their tricks and I know that they're going to surprise me, and I have to sort of be ready for that. And that's where you got to throw in a few extra legendary resistances or that kind of stuff, some layer actions or whatever, just to keep the challenge at that point. And like we talked about, it's not necessarily a mechanical challenge, but I need it to not be a pushover enough to the point that we can talk about those sort of consequence damage things that have come up. So
But I think it's also a player thing, right? In that players do bear responsibility for successful campaigns or successful organized play programs, successful one-shots at a convention, whatever it might be. For example, taking quick turns. You can get high level and it can get really complicated, but you should be able to take a quick turn. Don't have the leadership feat in 3rd edition with a druid companion with a beast when you're a ranger with a beast, and then cast a summoning spell. Like, that's probably not cool. And even in 5e medium levels, think about those summoning spells and what they do to gameplay.
Conjure woodland turns, creatures with pixies, right? That's the one everyone does.
Yeah.
Or at least have the conversation with your DM. Hey, I recognize this will take longer. This is a shtick I'm leaning into. What can we do to make this work easier?
Yeah.
I mean, like, if you know that's going to be your shtick, have the monster card sitting next to your character sheet. I summoned this thing. Boom. I have all his stats. I don't need to worry about it. My game master knows what I'm summoning. He's seen those stats. I talked to him beforehand. So this is just adding an extra thing to the overall combat. Sure, it adds a little bit more to the time, but because I've talked it out with people, we all knew it was coming.
And that kind of leans into my last question was about, as a player, how do you navigate the complexity of a high-level PC to help the game flow? Like, it's important, I think, generally, when playing D&D, to pay attention and to help make your round go smoothly and flow and move through things. But it becomes extra important at high level, because otherwise, you might spend an entire game session with one big combat and that's it, right?
Yeah. I mean, one thing for the player side is it's really important to have, especially in a long campaign, right? Be clear around your goals and aspirations, because that's often what makes a campaign super memorable. Is that you want to take over the Thieves Guild, or you want to grow to be the person who secretly controls the Senate, right? If you can do that kind of stuff, the DM's going to love it. The other players are going to feed off of it. And it's going to be really memorable. Whether the fights are super challenging or not, it's going to be really neat story-wise.
Yeah, scale is also a thing that you want to talk with. The players should talk with their DM, and the DM should talk to their players about. Are you concentrating on a kingdom level? Like, you guys top end play might be you're a duke in the kingdom. Cool, great. Make sure that that's understood. If the top end play is we're fighting gods, cool, that's great. But you need to make sure that the scale is communicated, because that rogue player may be going, wow, I really hope I'm the Thieves Guild head someday.
Right.
And the DM's thinking, I'm going to destroy that city because gods showed up and did evil things. Oops.
Right. Yeah. So there's as is often the case, communication is important, right?
Yeah.
One of the best experiences I've had come when the players see an opportunity to break it. The carefully constructed model the DM just spent 12 hours on, and then they choose not to because they're not here to do that. If you can play a high-level game and be that person, you're the best. That wasn't the case in all of our tests, because we were trying to break things and figure out what all the monstrous stuff was so we could avoid it, but be that person. If you can be that person, everyone will love your 5e game so much more, especially your DM, because they're already doubling, tripling, quadrupling their hours to prep a session. And then when you do that, there's no way to feel good about that. Like, you can smile and laugh, but there's a part of your soul that just got ripped out.
And it's important to say that that's also for non-combat scenes, right? Mm-hmm. So things like being able to read the mind of the guy who's giving you the job, being able to detect their alignment or know whether they're telling the truth, or cast divinations, or any number of things, right? Find object, locate object, that sort of stuff. A nice way to do it is to say to the DM, I'm thinking about using this spell or feature. Is that cool? Mm-hmm. And it gives them some time to think about it and go like, well, you're not sure if it'll work, or, they can at least start thinking about what they want to do with that and formulate an answer, versus I cast, zone of truth and we won't take the job unless they do this. And this is always what we do. And that's the end of the story. Nobody can ever lie to us.
And I had a player do that in my 1 to 20 5th edition campaign, where we were getting into the higher levels, and he's like, hey, I'm going to be an illusionist. I'm going into that school. And he was reworking his character at that point. And he's like, I'm going to do illusionism, the illusionist thing, right? Is that cool? Because, like, between Mirage Arcana and these other illusions that sort of change the entire battlefield, and then my ability to make parts of it real and change things, like that combination could be problematic if you're not ready for that, right? And so we had that conversation and talked about how it would work and where he might limit that and what have you. And I really appreciated that as a DM, that he's like, hey, I am looking at a combination that looks really cool. Is that going to be a problem? Like, or should I do something else? And that was really, really smart on his part.
For me, I like to. I'm a guy who loves minutia. Like I like sort of iterating out the implications of something. So if somebody is regularly casting Zone of Truth, for instance, well, first I'm going to look at the spell and see what it costs, which I actually don't know off the top of my head. But, does it have material components? All right, if I want it cast less often, I cut down on those material components. That's a thing that comes up with Raise Dead. Okay, yeah, sure, you've got the spell. Do you have the diamond?
Right.
How many crow's feast bowls are there in the world, says Mike.
Right.
Yes. But yeah, so those dealing with those costs and the minutia of those spells, because people look at the effects and don't always think about, well, what is this costing me? The other thing is, like, all right, if this is a common thing, then everybody does this. And that means that's going to affect how people deal with your characters. So they can't come in and lie to the local noble. They can't come in and, do this. So, like, it goes both ways. Deal with the implications of it. Look at the iteration of what's possible and what is actually going on in the world. If you're a ne'er-do-well and you live in a world where people use Zone of Truth a lot, well, you invest in finding a ring of mind shielding.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean.
So I think. Go ahead.
But. Yeah, I would say there was one thing I wanted to bring up because it's what caused me to write the blog post in the first place. People aren't playing high-level games. Like, there are some people playing, obviously.
All right.
But the vast majority of people aren't. Is it just because they're scared it's too complex? Is it because of the fact that they don't publish many adventures for it? Like, the official adventures, the only one that's gone up to 20 was Dungeon of the Mad Mage.
Which I continue to argue isn't an actual adventure, but yeah, go ahead.
Is it because modern life's complicated and getting together is hard? Kids, jobs, causes problems. I certainly run into that a lot. I'd be interested to know, because they posted a stat, D&D Beyond posted a stat that people weren't making characters above 13th level, really. There's a small spike at 20th, and everything between 13th and 20th, it was so low that it couldn't be measured as a single percentage. And I'm curious why people aren't doing it.
Well, we certainly don't have a large enough sample size here to answer that question, but it's.
Historically, we've heard from Wizards and Paizo and other companies that it doesn't sell well, right? There certainly is a market, but if you're going to make product A that is level 1 to 10 and product B that's a high level product, B is going to make less money.
Yeah. Well,
that creates a niche, I think, for people like Ryan.
Yeah, it does. And it should be said, when I complain about this, I'm doing so against my own self-interest, because every time WotC doesn't make something, I can swoop in and do it. But I do think a lot of... I did a poll today on my Twitter, which has 368 votes, which asked if you follow the leveling guidelines on DMG 263, which says you should level once each session for levels 1 through 3, 1 level per 2 sessions at level 4, and 1 level per 2 to 3 sessions on 5 onward. And according to the DMG, this is appropriate for an XP track and story benchmark track. The overwhelming 63.3% said no. So I think that's certainly a contributing factor. If people are not following the design intentions of the 5th edition model, that would certainly get you to higher levels faster, especially if your groups fall apart. I think that's a contributing factor. I do think, especially if people honestly think that high level 5e is hard to run and hard to set up and has lots of problems, a very solid high level adventure would provide a beautiful example of how to do it right. And I think the people at WotC are so amazingly talented that they're the ones best equipped to do it. And I just want one really good example, and then I'll shut up forever about it, about like an amazing high-level adventure. I think people should be encouraged to start at level 10. I don't see much wrong with that. I see people say they don't want to do it. I've seen people say they don't want to play high-level games, but very rarely are these people who tried it more than once. And if people gave those areas of the game the same level of effort that they gave their 1 through 5s, I think a lot more people would be playing it. I also think, and this is from my days as a semi-professional World of Warcraft raider, that the existence of that content does more than simply be a product for people to buy. Having a mountain with a beautiful peak is inspiring to all climbers, not just the ones who get to the top, and it impacts their experience, right? The knowledge that some people are there is a hopeful and inspiring thing, and maybe that's a bit esoteric, but I do like to, when I played 3rd edition, seeing adventures go that far inspired me to create my own stuff in that area, right? Like it really was inspirational and drove me into that space. And I want to see more beautiful mountain peaks. And sure, I'll know that only 2 to 5% of people who play the adventure ever get there, but I think the fact that it exists is encouraging to people as a whole, and maybe we'll never get data to support that, but that's sort of how I feel.
Teos, any last thoughts from you? I want to give everybody a chance for last thoughts, but we are well over an hour at this point, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that for DMs who haven't run high level and who are thinking about it, I would say, start mid and work up if you're in a campaign so that you can learn how these things work. And just keep talking to your players. The key is really that conversation so that you establish, hey, I'm having a problem with this aspect of the build. What do you think? Right? Just talk your way through it, converse through those issues, and rather than putting it on your shoulders that you must run some perfect campaign. The other thing I'd say is that in general, most DMs are better off being simple rather than complex, because complexity overwhelms us. We're not good at running super tactical things. So 6 monsters that have 20 abilities each is just too much. Just add damage to a simple monster. Nothing threatens players like lots of damage.
And the rules for the monsters are already built to be able to, like, hit points are supposed to be a range. So just stack them at the top of the range if you need them to last a little longer, right? So you can pull out some of their cool abilities that you never get time for and all that. That's part of the tricks that I got from Mike Shea, who we mentioned earlier, on Behind the DM Screen when I was getting ready to run those Demon Lords. I'm like, they're kind of walking over those early Demon Lords. What are we going to do? And he gave me some tips, and one of them was like, hit points is a range. Just go higher on them, right? And that fixed a lot of it. The other was given more actions, so I can pull off more of the cool. When you've got 20 different options and you want to play with them all, right? Give them more actions so they can do that kind of stuff. I guess for my last word, I want to say that I think from our conversation, I can sort of synthesize that we all sort of believe high level play is more complex and it has challenges compared to low level play. And I think, because we've talked a lot about what those challenges are and how to overcome them, but I also think it's worth trying, right? It's a fun level of play. There's fun stories to tell there, and players can have, like, it's fun to be fantasy superheroes, right? Like, this is a good game. Yeah. Like, it's a blast. And if you're not good at it, then then you're not good at it. But just like everything, you know how you get better? You do it more, right? So I know I feel like we've made it sound really complicated, and we're going to scare people away from actually trying high level play. Don't. Like, there are ways to overcome those challenges, and it can be really fun. So I think with that as my final word, unless anybody's really burning to jump in again, I'm going to go ahead and call this the end of the episode. Is that cool?
Sure.
All right. I mean, I know we could probably continue talking for another hour or two, but at some point I do need to go to bed. So
And make dinner.
All right, so we're calling that the end of the episode. I want to say thanks to our guests. Teos, where can people go on the internet if they want to find you?
Thank you for having me. I can be found at AlphaStream or at alphastream.org, which is my blog.
There you go, right on. And I also want to thank Jeremiah. Where can people go looking for you?
Well, I have jeremiahmccoy.com, of course, for most of my blogging and stuff like that. And then, of course, you can find me on Twitter as Tech Noir, and I will often be rambling about D&D stuff there a lot, like
Right.
a whole lot.
Ryan, what about you? Where should people go to look for you?
You can find a couple places. You can find me on Twitter at 2C Gaming, which is I'm the person who operates that Twitter account. So if I say something that upsets you, you know who's responsible, and you can come find me. And then you can live chat with me and other people who like our stuff on Discord, or find our products at 2cgaming.com, where we try and create 5th edition stuff that's a little bit off the beaten path, and enjoy it along the way. We do Kickstarters. They're very fun.
All right. And I also want to thank all of our listeners here on the stream. Those of you who are following us live, I tweeted it out, and that's where you can usually find the link. We are at The Tome Show on Twitter. And I have been doing this, right? I've been for a month or so now, a little more than a month. I have been streaming as many of the recordings of our podcast recordings as possible. And then eventually Sam or Aaron, will clean it up and make it sound pretty and put it out as the podcast, usually about a month or so later. So I want to thank all of those of you that joined us for the live stream. There was a great conversation going on. There's enough of a great conversation going on that I'm kind of like, why am I even on this episode? I should have had Mike Shea and Merrick B and all these other people that are engaged in this conversation. Like, you guys should be doing this, not me, right? But here we are. So thanks to those guys and gals who are on the chat and following this on the stream at twitch.tv/Tome Show. So look for us there. I also want to thank our listeners who support the show by using our affiliate links to Amazon or DM's Guild that are available at thetomeshow.com, and those who support us directly at patreon.com/thetomeshow, like Jill Sanders, Jeremiah McCoy, and Doug Palmer. If you want to get a hold of us, you can email thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter. I am at Squatch, SQUACH. Like I said, the show is at The Tome Show. And that is episode 333, where we saved reality itself with our godlike powers in this episode of The Tome. And that's where the echo effect goes in. Yay!
Yay!
Thanks for joining us on the stream, everybody. It's been fun.
Be sure to follow.
Thanks, folks.
Get notified.